Hi, my name is Beth Massey, and today I'm going to show you one way to create a grid control for editing tabular data using Windows Presentation Foundation, or WPF. There are many third-party controls as well as a data grid from the WPF team on CodePlex that you can use. In this video, I'm going to show you a simple way that you can customize the list view control to edit data. So I've got Visual Studio 2008 Service Pack 1 open, and the first thing we're going to need to do is get some data. If you've been following along with these videos, then you'll be familiar with this simple database that we created in the very first video called OMS. It stands for Order Management System. It just has a database of 4 tables that describe customers and their orders. So I want to edit just the customer data here in a WPF grid control. So we'll need a way to access this data first. In Visual Studio 2008, there are many ways to work with data. There's of course data sets, which I've shown how to work with in previous WPF videos. We can also access our data via link using link to SQL classes. And additionally, in Service Pack 1, we can now create an entity data model and work with the ADO.NET Entity Framework. But for this example, I'm going to use a simple link to SQL classes because this is a very simple data model and link to SQL classes are appropriate for that. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a new project. Let's go to File, New Project, and we're going to select WPF Application. Let's call this WPF Data Grid. There we go. Okay, and the first thing I want to add to this project is the link to SQL classes. Okay, so let's go to Project, Add New Item, and we're going to select Link to SQL classes right here, and I'm going to call this OMS. Okay, so this will open up the Object Relational Designer, and it allows us to just drag tables from our database here in the Server Explorer onto the design surface. And now we've got properties for every column inside our customer table. Alright, so let's write some code now in our window. So you'll notice that this is the designer. Okay, so we've got the XAML below and the designer up here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just add some code into our loaded event to load the data. And it's bad practice to load all of the customers in our database. I've pre-populated this table with about a couple hundred customers. So you never want to bring down all the data in your database, so it's good to write a filter or a query. So I'm going to use link to write a query, and we're just going to grab all the customers in California. So I'm going to create a class level variable up here called DB, and we're going to create this OMS data context. Okay, the data context is what communicates with the database. Alright, so now we can just create a custs in CA in California equals from C in DB dot customers where C dot state equal to CA. Okay, select C. Okay, so now this will just give us a iQueryable or a simple list of customers. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just set the data context equal to this list. Now what this means is, I've done this before when we were working with data tables. The data context of the window in this case means that all the controls, when we set bindings on those controls, will bind to this list, to this data source. Okay, so this is just a real handy way of setting the data source of your controls on the form. Alright, so the other thing we're going to want to do is we're probably going to want to move the position, because it's going to be a grid. We're going to want to keep track of this position inside of this collection because there's going to be many customers. So I've gone over this before here, but we're going to create what's called a collection view. So private, I'm going to call this a customer view, and it's going to be a binding list binding list collection view. Okay, and so now we can get the instance here. me.customer view is going to be, and I just need to convert this collection view source, has a shared method on it, or a static method called getDefaultView. Okay, and then we just pass it the data context. Okay, and then let's just binding. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here, let's move this out of the way. Okay, so I just casted the I collection view interface that's returned to the binding list collection view. Okay, so now that we have that code loaded, basically we've loaded our customers in California, we can now focus on the XAML we need to create this editable grid. So let's head on over to our designer here, and you can see the XAML below. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to create, you'll see this grid, it's really just a grid control in WPF. It's just for layout of the form. What I want to do is I want to put some buttons at the top of this form. So I'm going to click here, which creates columns and one column and 2 rows of this grid layout control. This is so I'm going to lay some buttons so we can add and delete rows from the grid and then save our data. Okay, so let's open up the toolbox and drop our controls down, and let's stick a button here. Okay, we'll put it right about here, and down here I'll call it save, and we'll name it up here btn save. Okay, and let's stick another one here. Okay, we'll do that. And we're going to put this one as add. VT and add. And one more. For delete. All right. All right, and I'm gonna make this so this docks to the left. They all dock to the left, so they won't stretch. Okay, cool. All right, so they won't stretch horizontally. All right, so now I want to stick the list view. Okay, we're going to use a list view inside of this area of the grid. Okay, so I'm just going to go over here and drop this list view in this area, and we're going to stretch it out like this. All right, so you can play ad nauseum with layout and on any form in any UI. So just to get this going, that's all I'm going to do. All right, so let's just get this thing displaying the list of customers. Okay, because we set the Windows data context to the list of customers, we can use a special syntax on this list view to pick up that same data context of the window. So let's go down here to the list view. It's easier to edit here in the XAML. And let me just move this out of the way now. Okay, and now you're going to see we can specify a property that binds to this data context, and that property is really just item source. So items source, okay, and equals, and the syntax for binding is just this. Now I don't have to specify a path here because what I wanted to do is bind to that entire collection of customers. But note if that we had, like, say, our customers and orders, and we wanted to bind a list view to the orders, then we could specify the path, and then you would specify the property to get at those orders. Okay, but we don't actually have any orders at all. Okay, we just want this to bind directly to the customers. All right, the other thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want the position of that collection view to change as we scroll through the list view. Okay, so the list view by default is not synchronized with that current item. So is synchronized with current item should be true, so that it will do that. Okay, so now as we scroll through this list view, the items in that list view, the position in that collection view will change, and vice versa. If we programmatically change the position in the collection view, then it will show up here in the list view. All right. Now the other thing is what we can do is just to get this display in our list of customers is we can specify a third property called display member path, and this is handy if you just want the list to display one of the properties of the objects that is in the collection. So I could say like last name, for instance. All right, so let's give this a run and see if this works. So let's hit F5. Okay, and we will see that we've got our list of customers by last name. Okay, so I've loaded some of these in alphabetical order, but you can see that we really didn't specify an order by clause, so we should probably add that on our query. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. We can actually do it c.firstname. Okay. All right, so but what we really want to do is not just display in a read-only list. What we really want this to be like is more like a real grid. So what we need to do is we need to add a grid view to this list view's view property. Okay, so there's a view property of the list view, and that view property we're going to specify a grid view inside. So the grid view lends itself well to this grid style table that lets you define multiple columns for the items in our data source, which will then display in multiple rows. So you can specify multiple grid view column objects, and they can be added to the grid view, which can then either automatically size to their content, or you can specify a width. Okay, so let's start building this thing. So what we're going to do is first remove the display member path, because we don't want to display just this single member. What we want to do is we want to add an entire list, a grid view inside of the list view. So let's go ahead and do this /list view. Okay, close off that tag, and inside of this we're going to list view dot view. Okay, so in here, let's raise this up a bit so you can see this a little bit better. Okay, now we're going to start to define the actual grid view. Okay, so what I want to do is display, let's just display last name, first name, and state in these columns. Okay, so first, let's display, write grid view. Okay, so that's one of the views of a list view. And we can specify in here grid view column, you'll see here now. So in the grid view column, there's some properties we want to set. Display member binding. Okay, so this is similar to what we were doing with the list view and it's read only. Now we're specifying columns, and we need to bind these to the properties of our customer. So the syntax is the path. Okay, so I'm going to do last name just like that. Okay, so the other properties we're going to specify is the header. Okay, so this is just what's displayed, last space name. Okay, and I'll make this a width equal to 100. 100. Okay, and we'll end that. Okay, so now I'm going to copy this out, and we're going to do the same thing for first name. Okay, and then first. And then finally we'll do it for city. And we'll make this one, actually I want to do this, let's do state since we're selecting by state. I think that's what I said before. There we go, state. Alright, cool. So now we've got this list view set up with these columns. Now let's go ahead and run it again. And so now we should be able to see 3 of the columns displayed. So hit F5. Okay, so there we go. Now we've got last name, first name, and state. Okay, so you've got here the headers. You can move them around if you want. Okay, but basically the problem, and we can resize them, the problem is that we're still not editable. We're getting closer though. You can see that this is sort of looking like a grid. So by default, the grid view can't directly update the data. So for this, we're going to need to add what's called a data template. Okay, so we're going to need to add this data template to the grid view columns cell template property. So the data template allows us to configure exactly what controls should be used for each of the columns, and we can pick anything we want, even custom controls, other custom controls we create. But for this simple example, we're just going to use text boxes in our data template. So what I'm going to do is again remove the display member binding from the column itself, because we're going to specify a template instead. So let's get this a bit like that, and we're going to close off that and do that, because what we're going to do is specify inside of this grid view column the grid view column cell template. Okay, so inside of this cell template, we're going to specify a data template. Okay, and the data template now can be any control we want that displays the data. And since a text box allows two-way data binding, we're going to specify a text box. Okay, so text, let's use a text box. And the text property is going to be what we bind to. Okay, so here's where we're going to specify our binding. And this one's going to be last name. Oops, I have an extra quote. There we go. Okay, and then I can end the text box. Okay, cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to basically specify the same kind of thing for these other two columns as well. Okay, so let's just get rid of this. And inside we'll put first name. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing here for state. Okay, so obviously if you had like checkboxes that were more appropriate for Boolean fields and that sort of thing, you could stick those right here in the data template. Okay, so the data template will display these properties for each of our customers. Okay, so if we run this though, you'll notice that, let's go ahead and run it. You'll notice that it doesn't line up quite right. Okay, our text boxes are kind of off. Okay, you see how they're not really filling up the whole space. Okay, now you actually we can start editing this. Okay, but you'll notice it's kind of weird how they expand as we need them. So we just need to adjust the layout a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify what's called an item container style for this list view item, for each of the items that are displayed. So let's go back up to the list view here. And before the view property, let's go ahead and create a list view item container style. Okay. And in here, what I want to do is I want to specify a style, and we get the target type is going to be equal to this list view item. Okay, so each of the items in this list view, and I'm going to set, we're going to create a setter, I'm going to set this property called horizontal content alignment. Okay, horizontal content alignment. The content, I want it to, the value equal to stretch. All right, there we go. So now I've got it to stretch. Now also what I'm going to do on these text boxes is to line them up a little bit better is I'm going to also specify a margin here. Okay, so and the margin is going to actually be minus, we're going to stretch it even more. It's going to be -6 on the left and on the right. Okay, and this will actually line it up perfectly. Oops. All right, so we can go ahead and stick this same margin on all these text boxes. Okay, so we're just making it look a little bit more like a real grid here. Okay. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and run it again and see what it looks like now. Very cool. All right, so now you can see how it stretches out. That's much better. All right, there we go. Okay. Okay, so now let's hook up the buttons for save, add, and delete. So let's go ahead and hook up add first. So in Visual Studio 2008 Service Pack 1, they added some methods onto the collection view for adding and removing items directly through the view. So that's what I'm going to do. So first let's add a new customer. So I'm going to say dim customer equals, and we're just going to convert the type of the add new from the collection view. So me.customerView.addNew, so this is a new method here, and I'm just going to cast that to customer because that's what we're working with, our customer objects. And I'm just going to say customer.lastName just to give an indicator that it's new and we need to fill it out. And I could add validation in here and that sort of thing, but I'm just going to say now customer view dot commit new. Okay, so if you ever work with WinForms, this is kind of similar to the binding source methods. Okay, so now I've got add there, so let's also do the delete button. So hook up the event, click event handler here. So in this case, I'm just going to first check to make sure that the current position is not -1. So there is some sort of position here. We're sitting on a customer or a row. Okay, then now I can say customer view dot remove at. Okay, at the current position. Customer view dot current position. Now if we hadn't set the list view to synchronize the current item, then this would always remove the top one. Okay, so that's why it's important to synchronize. All right, so then finally the save button is real easy because we have a connected link to SQL data context. We can just do try and me.db.save or submit changes. Okay, and okay, otherwise we'll just report the problem. Okay, very cool. All right, so let's go ahead and run this and see if this all works. Okay, so let's go ahead and Catherine 111, and we'll add a new row, and you'll see now it's down at the bottom here. Okay, so we want to move the position to the last one, probably is a good idea. So let's go ahead and say Massey Beth. Okay, and I'm in California, and we can delete one. Like let's delete this one. Now notice it didn't delete the one I selected. Now why is that? Well, we actually have a focus problem. Okay, so we're not actually on the row. The row's focus doesn't change if we go inside the text boxes. It only changes, and let me expand this, it only changes if I select the row outside of these text boxes. So the text box focus is kind of swallowing the focus, and it's not letting the list view or this grid view change its position. Okay, so what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to fix that, because we're going to want to basically not delete the top row. We're going to want to delete the row we're on. So if I select this one and then click delete, then Adams actually deletes. Okay, so but let's try save. Okay, so there it goes, and it's saved. All right. So how do we fix that focus problem? Well, what we're going to want to do is we're going to set an event setter in that item container style. So let's go back over here. Okay, and we'll reload because we made some code changes. Okay, so in here, what we want to do is we want to set an event setter, because we're going to set an event, and the event is going to be got focus. Okay, and we're going to add a handler. And the handler, let's just call it item got focus. All right, cool. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add a event handler to set the position manually when the focus gets set inside of the list view item. So let's just go to our code behind here, and down at the bottom we'll add this event handler for the items got focus. So first let's get the item, and we can get that by casting the sender to a list view item. There it is. And then we want to set the list view's selected item equal to the item's data context, which would be the customer, okay, that we're focused on. So the other thing we wanted to do was we also wanted to make sure that we show the customer when we add. We move the position and scroll the grid to the customer. So let's go ahead and say me.listview1.scroll into view this customer that we just added. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so now when we run it, we shall see when we click in the list boxes, now we're getting the right position. Okay, so it's focusing correctly. So when I hit delete on Teresa Atkinson, there she goes away. Okay, all right, and then if I hit add, you'll see now I've scrolled into view. Okay, so there we go. Great. So that's how you build a very simple WPF data grid. So I'd like to thank you for your time. If you'd like to check out more videos, you can look on MSDN Developer Centers, or for more information on WPF and Windows Forms development, head on over to windowsclient.net. Thanks again.